So, in the spirit of not prognosticating on current events, but stepping back and taking the longer view, because I think that's what will help us to figure out how to fix things in our world, which are very broken. I'm going to read from a section of my book that I published last year, Ideological Possession and the Rise of the New Right, from Chapter 6, Signs of Mass Psychosis, in the section Neoliberalism. Prior to that section, I've dealt with Jacques Ellul and his idea of technique, or loosely translated technical rationality, and its effect on our way of thinking in our modern world. And then I've also dealt with inverted totalitarianism as a concept put forward by Sheldon Wolin, dealing with corporate power. In this section, I deal with Wendy Brown and her idea of neoliberalism. And so I'll begin. If the dynamic of technique stopped at economic activity, we might still escape the control implied in the term inverted totalitarianism, even though we are trained through a constant bombardment of advertising to fit into the economic machine as consumers and not as citizens. But as Ellul first made clear, technical progress has become the driving force and underlying mentality in all areas, even those areas that have no direct economic ramifications. What Ellul glimpsed at has come to pass, according to Wendy Brown, who picks up where Ellul and Wolin left off. Brown agrees with Wolin that the state is no longer political. It has become technical and managerial. The power of democratic participation, as everyone now intuits, means less and less as the executive branch grows out of citizens' control in the quest to manage not only the economy, but our education, child rearing, physical health, and even our mental health and happiness. In fact, in Brown's analysis, the configuration and attitude of corporations and government are on the path to becoming so similar it will be difficult to distinguish one from the other. Government then becomes what Wolin terms managerial democracy, not only managing the populace and its reaction to the actions of government and economic forces, but also operating more and more not as a political entity, but as a provider of services to customers. Ironically, this maneuver puts more and more of the scope of government outside of the reach of democratic control in the name of the efficient and effective care of constituents. The idea that government is a service provider responsible for serving customers who want to have better experiences rather than a representative of the people's will, beholden to the people for its makeup and its priorities, reflect the change towards managerial democracy or inverted totalitarianism to which Wolin refers. But if this was all that neoliberalism meant, it would simply describe the ongoing transformation of government, something that began as early as World War II or the Cold War. This transformation aimed at enhancing and extending U.S. Western power that cannot be hindered by the unmanaged and active citizenry. Brown justifies the use of the term neoliberalism and insists on it representing a new order of things on the grounds that the same mentality so easy to see in corporate structuring and in the structuring of government implied in the quote above now pervades spheres of life previously held to be quite separate and different from the market and economic activity. She writes, I treat neoliberalism as a governing rationality through which everything is economized, and in a very specific way. Human beings become market actors and nothing but. Every field of activity is seen as a market, and every entity is governed as a firm. Importantly, this is not merely a matter of extending commodification and monetization everywhere. That's the old Marxist depiction of capital's transformation of everyday life. Neoliberalism construes even non-wealth generating spheres, such as learning, dating, or exercising, in market terms, submits them to market metrics, and governs them with market techniques and practices. Above all, it casts people as human capital who must constantly tend to their own present and future value. Neoliberalism Is market technique replacing other modes of understanding and action in every sphere of life? Places of worship become organizations that employ social, scientific, and economic models to recruit clients and employ psychological and marketing research to keep their attention, retaining their membership, and gaining financial support from them. Parents outsource parenting to techniques developed by experts in the form of state-licensed daycare providers, but also parenting manuals and coaching, therapists, and of course the school systems, armed with the latest and ever-changing pedagogical theories. For Brown, perhaps the most glaring example of applying market thinking to non-market activities is in universities where, quote, the market value of knowledge, its income-enhancing prospects for individuals and industry alike, is now understood as both its driving purpose and leading line of defense, end quote. She writes, quote, also on the horizon are new enterprise zones encircling public universities, where businesses large and small will make direct use of university goods, including research technology, consultants, and cheap student labor, end quote. All of this may sound acceptable, if not good, until we remember what is missing. An education in history, philosophy, the humanities, necessary for students to come out with critical analytical skills so that they can be engaged citizens. In the neoliberal order, every area of life can be managed by a system, by expertise, or increasingly by impersonal software. Even our supposedly most intimate and personal lives, our relationships, our sexual partners, our friends, are more and more based on data and managed by apps, helping us to shop based upon criteria as consumers of experience. In this dynamic, nothing is done for its own sake or just because. Science is portrayed by scientists as some sort of noble quest for whatever may be found by their experiments, but as Ellul says, it is, quote, becoming more and more subordinate to the search for technical application. It is the extreme level of dehumanization implied by the term neoliberalism as Wendy Brown deploys it that has created, at this moment, the psychological pressure necessary to lead people to the ideological possession implied by strongman leaders and growing alt-right and new right movements. But there are at present two manifestations of ideological possession to be seen in Western societies, of which right-leaning movements are only one manifestation. The first ideological possession embraces the appearance, if not the substance, of neoliberalism. It pushes people to believe with great fervor in the dominant imaginary of freedom in the midst of an effective regime change which limits true freedom in a myriad of ways. The average citizen senses that he has little to no control over government and becomes interested in participation only through the sensationalist news cycle and or through social media. He equates economic freedom with the ability to purchase consumer items without acknowledging the lack of freedom implied in the precariousness of his income and his relative lack of capital. Despite his own personal experience, he embraces the idea that he lives in the freest and most democratic country in the world where everyone can make it with enough effort. He may even be persuaded, as Arlie Hochschild so poignantly explained in Strangers in Their Own Land, to argue against any attempt to wrest power away from the government or his corporate employers, as if such attempts were anti-freedom, un-American, undemocratic, and in fact downright communistic. His religious faith becomes intimately tied with the economic interests of elites whose wealth is completely beyond his reach and who have actively exploited his need to believe. According to Brown, the true believer who puts up with extreme alienation is spoken to by those in power in heroic terms and is encouraged to see his losses as a noble sacrifice, thus invoking his civilization's core Christian narrative. He is no longer called upon to sacrifice his life for his country in battle. The professional volunteer military is viewed as simply doing a job, but he instead sacrifices in a quasi-religious fashion his or her own good life for the good of the economy. This is, as Brown puts it, the inversion of freedom to sacrifice. Sacrifice entails such things as, quote, sudden job losses, furloughs, or cuts in pay, benefits, and pensions, or it may involve suffering the more sustained effects of stagflation, currency deflation, credit crunches, liquidity crises, foreclosure crises, and more. Shared sacrifice may refer to the effects of curtailed state investment in education, infrastructure, public transportation, public parks, or public services, or it may simply be a way of introducing job sharing, that is, reduced hours and pay, regardless, as active citizenship is slim to tending oneself as responsibilized human capital. Sacrificial citizenship expands to include anything related to the requirements and imperatives of the economy. End quote. That was Wendy Brown. But there is another kind of ideological possession that is gaining ground against this first kind. The second kind of ideological possession is percolating upwards amongst those who can no longer believe in the dominant narrative, those whose faith has been too disrupted by their own experience of economic destruction and social and political alienation, those who do not want to sacrifice any more to the gods of economic expansion. Aitaksh and Oneksh, I'm maybe massacring their names, but they're two scholars, co-wrote an article, argue that this rejection of the dominant narrative is not just an American or European phenomenon, but a worldwide one, encompassing left-leaning and right-leaning populism in the global South, as well, particularly in Latin America and Asia. The populism erupting in the global South is due, in their view, to the frequency of the financial crises experienced, end quote. The subsequent breakdown in the Washington Consensus and the highly inegalitarian impact of neoliberal reforms in those regions. It is the second populist faith that explains the appeal of strongman charismatic leaders like Turkey's Erdogan, the Kirchners in Argentina, Russia's Putin, and American President Donald Trump, among others. Populism gives ordinary citizens the sense that they can see behind the veil of routine politics to the puppet masters working behind the scenes. It calls on people to take back their power from the elites who have not served them well, and to do so by putting their trust in a strong man's ability to speak and act on their behalf, or a strong woman's ability in the case of Frances Marine Le Pen, who unsuccessfully ran for the French presidency in 2017 and who won approximately 33% of the vote. Among those citizens who strongly identify with New Right populism, especially in the United States, there is the favored metaphor of taking the red pill, an allusion to the story of in the movie series The Matrix, in which the hero Neo awakens from an illusory world by taking the red pill from Morpheus, who says, quote, "This is your last chance. After this, there is no turning back. You take the blue pill, the story ends. Wake up in your bed and believe whatever you want to believe. You take the red pill, you stay in Wonderland, and I show you how deep the rabbit hole goes. Remember, all I'm offering is the truth, nothing more." Those who are red-pilled become like Neo, aware of what is going on. In Neo's world, this means realizing that he's really being hooked up to a machine, part of a living battery system for aliens who have filled his mind with pleasant experiences of a pseudo-life he has not really lived. When he takes the red pill, it comes with an automatic obligation to resist. Unfortunately, those who are red-pilled in our world are only taking half a dose. Those attracted to identitarian and New Right movements such as the American alt-right or the French Nouvelle Droite see the world in terms of nation and race, rejecting neoliberalism's insistence that profit is the only good and reliable incentive and that globalization of markets and culture are an unmixed good. They begin to see that racial identity, whose fruition is some sort of ethno-state, is the source of the meaning they lack in the neoliberal order. They therefore conclude that immigration, legal or illegal, is a major threat to their racial and ethnic homogeneity and their ability to cooperate to bring their group economic stability and prosperity. But to fully appreciate why the new right emerged and to try to understand what is present and what is missing in it, we need to better understand the core ideas that inspire it. So that is the end of chapter 6 of my book, Ideological Possession and the Rise of the New Right. I hope that it helps people to take a step back and think about the forces that may be behind the ongoing events in our world, and because that's the first step in thinking about how we can possibly fix them.